I was in SEAL training on 9/11. The instructors, they said, gentlemen, we're going to war and we're going to beat you until those of you who don't want to be here quit. SEAL training is really about like one thing. It's about figuring out who's going to ring that bell.
You did a piece with Vice. You're like, and now they're shooting at Boko Haram. There's like a guy hanging out to the side with like a machine gun. He's just like,
Yeah.
You can just tell like you're much more comfortable than I think like a normal journalist would be.
If we are not just giving veterans a renewed sense of mission and purpose, but we're not also paying attention to their financial security, all of the mission stuff in the world isn't going to matter.
All right, guys. Bang, bang. I've got Kaj here with me. I thought a great place to start. Navy SEAL training is one of the toughest military schools that someone can go through. It's brutal. I think over the last couple of years, more and more SEALs have started to talk about their experiences. People have seen folks like David Goggins or Jocko and some of these individuals become very popular in the civilian world. But there's a lot of change going on. How do you think about your experience training and the things that you went through? Would that be cool today? Would they still do those same things, or has it changed?
Well, it's interesting. It's funny. You just brought up a couple of my friends. You know, the SEAL community is tight-knit community. Jocko was my first jiu-jitsu instructor. And one of the best things about Jocko is like there's no persona, there's no artifice there. Like with Jocko, it's like that old school computer language, WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. That is Jocko, like unadulterated. And I was sort of reared. Literally, he was my first jiu-jitsu coach. He's a slightly senior officer to me in the SEAL team. So I was a very junior officer, and he was a junior officer at the same time. So we're of that same generation. And you know, like, I like to think I'm, slightly more refined. Jocko could be pretty Paleolithic at times. But yeah, increasingly, like I was in SEAL training, BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training on 9/11.
Wow.
I was in first phase of BUDS. I just completed a 2-mile ocean swim. And I remember that day very distinctly because prior to that, you could kind of call the SEAL teams maybe like a shoot, dive, jump club, right? It was a good time, right?
Yeah.
And people, I didn't know much about SEALs when I went in. We weren't high profile in the media the way we are today. But like, pejoratively, you could say like, oh, those guys, they're just like this like small unit, like doing their thing. It wasn't as operational. Obviously, September 11th changed all of that for both the SEAL community and for myself.
So you're in the water. 9/11 happens and you get out and they're just like, hey guys, somebody just flew a plane into the tower. Like, how do they tell you? Yeah,
we were changing out in, you're doing this like quick where you get rid of your rubber fins and you're taking off your wetsuit and stripping down and you're always rushed. And then those 2-mile ocean swims in the morning, right after that, you run to the chow hall. So you start at like 5 a.m. or something. And by the time you finish, you're running over trying to make it to the chow hall with your class before they close. It's another 1.5 mile run to get over to the chow hall. And as we were changing out, you could sort of hear whisper rumors. There's all these sort of, besides the instructors, peripheral personnel who are like, helping maintain medical personnel and stuff like that. Somebody was saying like, oh, a plane hit the World Trade Center and all this stuff. So as we were running over to the chow hall, that rumor was kind of circulating through. At this point, the class is still very large, 200 plus guys, right? My class started with 246 guys. We graduated 26 originals. So we were still this big, massive raging horde at this point running over to the chow hall on the other side of the amphibious space. And people were sort of saying like a plane hit the tower. I candidly thought that it might have been a ruse of the instructors because they're always doing things that fuck with you, right? And they're always playing these little fuck games. And so I was like, oh, this is another one of their games. And then we got over to the chow hall and there was TVs in the chow hall because that's where the regular naval personnel eat as well. So there was TV. It's not as austere.
The people who didn't go on the 2-mile swim,
right.
a 1.5-mile run to get there.
Yeah, they're just waking up, getting their coffee, Yeah, we call it the shoe navy, right? As opposed to the boot navy. So, and then on the TV screens, we saw the images, right? And then I knew that this was real, partially because like the instructors, frankly, aren't that sophisticated. They could never pull off this, right? So we come back from the chow hall. It's very obvious that something catastrophic has happened. And the instructors, to their credit, they had an incredibly clairvoyant, clear sense of what was going on. And they said, gentlemen, we're going to war and we're going to beat you until those of you who don't want to be here quit. And that's what they did. And that was a horrific day for us, just a physically grueling day. And, for us, you're a bud student, there's like lots going on. It's hard to think through the strategic implications of what had happened.
Yep.
But for these guys, the instructors who their buds assignment is just a rotation, just come from an operational SEAL team, they knew really quickly what it meant. And so they had an even more clarified sense of mission and purpose that day because they knew that the guys in the class, the students, like we were going to rotate. If we graduated, we were going to be in platoons fighting right alongside those instructors.
Yeah.
So, they beat the hell out of us. A bunch of people quit. And that was my entrance to the teams.
Did they change the training at all in terms of trying to accelerate folks? Or was this a point where a lot of the units still had enough people where if they were sent out, then, hey, we're good. We don't need to actually change training, accelerate the graduation of people or anything like that?
One of the things that's interesting about the SEAL selection, as you mentioned, is generally considered, some of the hardest military special operations selection in the world, is no matter how big they open the funnel at the top, they really pretty much seem to get the same number.
26 people graduate.
Exactly. It's remarkable how unchanged and how similar it's been since the creation of the SEAL team, since President Kennedy created the SEAL teams back in 1961.
Yeah. It's crazy to me also, I think, how celebratized the SEAL teams have gotten. And the few that I know, they are like, hey, that's like a weird thing. That's not how this was supposed to happen. But it makes sense that whether it's Hollywood, the media, whoever, like, what better story than like, oh, these guys are swimming, in the dark of night and showing up with guns, and like it's a story that they want to tell, but it is very in contrast, I think, to a lot of the ethos of the unit, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit SEAL inside baseball, but when I entered the SEAL teams, I was playing water polo at the Naval Academy. I look back at my water polo team from the Naval Academy, and something like of the 21 of us, like 14 of us went Naval Special Warfare, which is the SEAL team. So it was a feeder, a pipeline program that. Prior to that, I had never really even heard of Navy SEALs. Back in the old days, right? It was all Chuck Norris Delta Force. Everybody was talking about Delta Force, right? Now Delta Force is like sort of like, smirking at us like, oh, we're the real quiet professionals now. And you guys are these like, Hollywood hair gel guys, right? I think like many corporate institutions, there was this inflection point in 2011, right? Where we went from having an ethos of what we called the quiet professional, and then we had to transition to this very public-facing role, right? The idea that we were going to continue to remain the quiet professionals and out of the spotlight after bin Laden, arguably the single most important mission operation since World War II. To me, that was untenable, right? Like we were very firmly in the public spotlight. And like any organization, we've had sort of some real growing pains with going from a shadowed organization into one that's directly in the spotlight. And I think we're still going through that today.
When you see the bin Laden raid and the killing of bin Laden, how much of the public's interest, like obviously it's bin Laden, right? So there's a lot of people who cared about it. But the story of how it happened, the helicopter goes down, and kind of all these things that really, I think, put a light onto, oh, these are these professionals who are prepared for any situation. And most people, if they were just sent to do something like this and the helicopter went down, they'd like call their boss and be like, hey, what do we do? Right? But the SEALs got the job done and were able to get themselves out. No one was killed from the American side. Like all these things, how much of the story shined a light on it, on top of it being bin Laden himself?
I think what it exposed, and look, the better dude to talk about this is my friend Rob O'Neill. I'll introduce you guys. You guys are going to love each other. Great dude. And, Rob talks about this extensively, from an operational perspective. I think part of the reason that, besides just like you implied, that it wasn't just that it was bin Laden, right? It was that pulling this off in Pakistan, which is arguably one of the most dangerous countries in the world, right? It's a nuclear armed nation that we've had a very complex relationship with throughout the conflict in Afghanistan. Pulling that off, despite all of the obstacles, right, is is impressive, right? That's textbook. Like, we had spent a decade sharpening the knife preparing for that kind of operation, but it all goes back to what happens in SEAL training, in BUDS, right? The ethos is you are taught to improvise, to adapt, to overcome, and to accomplish the mission, like, regardless of what obstacles are thrown in your face. SEAL training is really about like one thing. It's about figuring out who's going to ring that bell, right? We say everybody wants to be a frogman on a sunny day, right? Like, yeah. Who wants to be a frogman when you're cold, you're wet, you're tired, you're hurting, right? That's what BUDS is. It's like, there's all these like tricks and tips, and like there's been some high profile media articles as of late about what's happening in SEAL training. But you can really boil it down to its essence. Is somebody going to ring that bell or not?
Yeah. Well, again, I've never gone through Navy SEAL training. I went through basic training on the Army side and in some of those schools. And they're tough, but as a 17, 18-year-old kid, you know, if you're half athletic and like not an idiot and don't quit, like you'll be fine. But when I read the articles about the SEAL training, on one side, I'm like, okay, they write it in such a way where it's like, are we killing the SEALs, right? You know, like they write it as if it's literally the worst thing in the world. On the other side, it's like, hey, these are the people that we're going to send to go fight our enemies on the battlefield. Like, probably want pretty tough people, right? We want them skilled. We want them to have some of this training. How do you think through the critiques, but also having gone through the experience of like, well, maybe some of this is like by design or actually is helpful in sharpening the tools that the nation uses in war?
Yeah, look, I think you encapsulated the dichotomy perfectly there, right? That as of late, there's been a lot of attention and spotlight. There was just a high-profile New York Times article that came out sort of critiquing SEAL training. And when I read it, I thought to myself, wow, this is a real piece of shit. Right. Yeah. And like, I actually hold the New York Times in incredibly high esteem. Like I come from the journalism world, right? I spent a tremendous amount of time in my civilian career as a conflict zone correspondent, right? The New York Times has always been sort of the gold standard for journalism in a lot of ways. And I read this front page article about SEAL training and drug use and culture of drug abuse. And I was like, oh, this is written by somebody who fundamentally doesn't understand what's happening inside the wall. And the root of that critique was there was a death in SEAL training about 6 months ago. The article just came out a month ago, but there was a death in SEAL training. A guy, I feel bad butchering his name. I think it's Kyle Mullen was his name. He played football at Yale, came over to BUDS, went through training and died post Hell Week, right? And
I think key piece is he made it through Hell Week and then like a couple days after.
Yeah, so you secure Hell Week on like a Friday. He was in the barracks that night, and I think it was SIPE. It's sort of unclear, like but essentially like he died as a result of injuries sustained in Hell Week, right? Super tragic. And I feel for his family tremendously. Like his mom's been on a big crusade to hold people accountable. And I think that is understandable and just, right? And I think certainly that there was mistakes made. There's a med check process, right? I remember when I finished Hell Week, you basically spend 2 days in bed recovering, peeing in Gatorade bottles because you can't get up to go to the bathroom. But there's supposed to be people who are coming around and sort of checking and doing wellness checks on you. And I think some part of that process and system failed. In the 6 months since that has happened, I have been able to talk to the Naval Special Warfare Center, and I've been able to observe that they have they've plugged those holes, right? And so total mistake, total tragic. But the indictment of the overall training process troubles me. And the reason it does is because when you look at it in aggregate, in grand total, there's been 11 deaths throughout the course of the SEAL history in training, right?
Really?
And 11 is a tragic number, right? But 11 since 1961, right? Over the course of, 50, 60 plus odd years, almost 70 years of training, is not a staggering number to me, a little over one a decade, right?
And this is with how many approximate classes are going through buds a year?
These are gross approximations. Sometimes there's 4 classes, sometimes there's 5 classes, right? But say 1,000 people a year.
People.
Exactly. Say 1,000 people a year going through training. So, and like, look, no death, no loss is desired or even acceptable. And buds is actually a pretty safe environment, right? And they do, considering the intensity and the risk of the training, I actually think they do. And I am not like an apologist for the SEAL community. I would be the first to sort of, critique where we can do better. And like that med check failure is certainly a place that could be done better. But when I really scale back and look at the 50,000 foot view, it comes down to this for me. You're asking these men, and it's all men in SEAL training, to do superhuman tasks. And it's very difficult then to hold them to human standards if you're trying to do that, right? We want them to perform impossible missions. And in order to do that, we have to test their mettle. And we have to test their mettle in the most extreme close to combat circumstances we can. And that's the best we can do at buds. And the challenge for the instructors and for the SEAL community is to walk that right up to the line, to simulate as close as we can the experience of being in combat and the rigors and stress of combat, while obviously trying to keep people safe. And it's sad, but to me, understandable that in this one domain, that occasionally there are accidents, occasionally there are mistakes. And I do think that there are places in the U.S. military, in our national defense, where we need those units. We need units that are capable of doing the hardest, dare I say, close to impossible missions. And in order to, as you said, keep the knife that sharp, you have to push the envelope in training. I think you see this in other communities too. Look at test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base, right? Every one of those wives, if you go back and read like great books like The Right Stuff written by Tom Wolfe about the early days of test pilot school. I was just actually out at Edwards talking to a test pilot family, and they live with this every day. They know those guys are out there punching holes in the sky on the edge of the envelope in order to figure out what's possible. Keep the U.S. military as the tip of the spear. So I think overall, considering how extraordinarily dangerous SEAL training is, they actually do a decent job. Is that fair?
I think it's 100% fair. And again, from an outsider's view, but understanding of the military, what I always try to do is try to draw a line maybe from, okay, so this training that is very intense. I mean, we're literally talking about there are people who are passing out in the water, being revived, going right back in the water. Like, that's not normal, right? It's kind of like Elon Musk is like, I'm trying to go to Mars. Did you think I'd be normal?
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm trying to do some of this wild stuff. Do you think I'd be normal? But if you draw a line to Marcus Luttrell's story, right, and kind of that mission, and I think it's been really blasted out into the media with the movie and all this stuff. It's like, hold on a second. We're going to ask the people who are in that training to go and be one of the 4 guys who are going to fight on this mountain. And one of the 4 is literally going to be crawling on his hands and knees with a broken back. And like you go through it and you're like, hey, maybe we actually owe these people the ability to be prepared in these situations, right? Like to some degree, it's almost,
flip the narrative.
Yeah. It's like, are we really going to ask these individuals to go and not give them our best training?
Yeah. Nailed it 100% on the head. And, life is a strange loop, full circle. Marcus's identical twin brother, Morgan, was my swim buddy that morning on September 11th. So really, our community is small, so it's, not surprising. But, look, I'll say one more thing to bash on that shitty New York Times article, right? And why they fundamentally misunderstand the culture that you and I come from is and maybe this is more a comment on the media than the article in particular, but I looked at that headline and it said, rife culture of cheating and drug abuse within SEAL training, right? And they cited like the presence of steroids in maybe some of the people who've had medical issues and stuff, it's because they're using steroids, and that they got some anonymous quotes or some quotes about people using steroids in SEAL training and whatnot. Look, I'm here to tell you, like a natural bodybuilder, so I didn't use steroids in SEAL training. I performed quite well. Only an outsider would make that mistake of thinking that steroids are an advantage in SEAL training. Because I think from the outside, you think that these are physical evolutions, and they're not, right? The whole purpose of SEAL training, to see if you'll ring that bell, is to test your grit, your mental fortitude, your mental toughness. It's a mental evolution, right? And steroids aren't going to help you. They might, maybe if you had Lance Armstrong's, doping guy, give you some small performance advantage, but in general, like, it's not physical, it's mental. And that's the fundamental mistake.
We haven't found the drug that makes you mentally tough yet.
Right, exactly. And that's why, like, that article was laughable. And so when I read a headline about, culture of drug abuse, I was like, oh, no, you fundamentally don't get it. Headlines like that, and I find this to be a problem sort of writ large in the media landscape these days, is that the institution, and it's not their fault, they are incentivized for salaciousness and not for truth.
Yeah. I forget the exact numbers, but one of the most interesting stats to me, I think it's across all special operations, the average height and weight, it's like 5'11", 180 or 190, right? And I think people, because of the media and movies and things like that, they think everyone's 6'4", 250 pounds and will rip your head off.
Yeah.
Like, yes, they can kill you, but it is, to some degree, you need people who are mentally tough, and you need people who are versatile. It's not just about who's got the biggest muscles as much as it is who can solve problems, who can do some of these different things. And I think that gets lost a lot because it sounds great. Like, oh, Navy SEALs are all using steroids. And, of course they are.
Totally, right? And not that there aren't steroids. Of course there are. But when we're trying to paint an accurate picture of an overall community, the average age of a SOF, Special Operations Forces operator, is 34 years old with 2 children, right? It takes a decade to develop the skills of jumping, diving, shooting in order to conduct missions like Neptune Spear or Red Wings or any of these like high-profile missions that you read about, or more importantly, the ones you don't read about.
Yeah. When you think of all of the missions that folks are aware of, is there one that you look at and you're like, that was some crazy shit? Like, whenever you talk to somebody who's trained for something, who's kind of in a club, whether it's in business, whether it's in the military, sports, whatever, most of the things I think outsiders are impressed by, people are like, it's cool, but like the insiders aren't impressed. But was there one where you guys were all like, yo, that was fucking cool? Like I can't believe they pulled that off.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by 8 Sleep. Good sleep is a game changer, and the 8 Sleep Pod is the best sleep machine. I sleep on it every single night. A great night of sleep allows you to be healthier, be more rested, and have more energy throughout the day. And on the brand new 8 Sleep Pod 3, you can sleep as cold as 55 degrees Fahrenheit or as hot as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the secret of thermoregulation. Better sleep, better energy. Get yourself an 8 Sleep. You can go to 8sleep.com/pomp today to go ahead and get $150 off your order. 8sleep.com/pomp. Not only do I sleep on it every night, it literally changed my life, and I begged the founders to let me invest in the company. 8sleep.com/pomp. Go get yourself an 8 Sleep pod and get a better night of sleep.
Well, there's 100 that I can talk about and 100 that I can't, right? But I'll tell you something that stands out in my mind that's in the public domain is one that was sort of portrayed as a failure, but I think if we look at it from a different perspective or a different lens, like imagine what happened. So there was an operation that went down to capture a high-profile, a high-value target in Somalia. So this was a terrorist leader, if my memory serves me correct, associated with Al-Shabaab, which is one of the terrorist organizations that operates out of Somalia. It was on a beach north of Mogadishu. He was in a safe house. The SEAL operational unit inserted via water, which is our maritime domain specialty, inserted via water in the early hours of the morning, pre-dawn, and got in a huge firefight with the guards there. Thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition dumped in both directions. The GFC, the ground force commander, made the decision to tactically withdraw back to the water. Like any firefight, it's messy, right? A few magazines, a few radios get dropped in the middle of this several.
You guys litter? Navy SEALs litter?
$1,000 $1,000.
Oh my God. Okay.
I mean, in general, we try and sanitize the beach, but and so there was like Shabab or the Somali offshoot group, they posted some pictures like, oh, these guys, we got in this big firefight and here's the evidence, here's their radio, and here's, the magazines that got left behind or whatever. And, I guess sort of in terms of mission objective, the mission was a failure, right? They failed to capture that high value target, right? And so those are the facts, right? That's what happened, right?
Yep.
Like they didn't complete the mission objective, right? But nobody was killed, right? And if you think about what really happened, I spent a lot of time in Somalia, Mogadishu. Somalis in general are actually pretty fearful of the water. They don't swim very well, right? There's some fishermen and stuff who are comfortable, but even like some of the Somali pirates that we rolled up, like didn't know how to swim. So here you have like a senior terrorist leader at his beach house in Somalia, right? And in the middle of the night, a SEAL commando unit scubas in, inserts from the ocean, the dark ocean, shoots up your entire house, kills, kills so many of your security guards. There's an hour-long firefight raging, and then poof, they retreat back into the water in the middle of the night. What's the psychological effect of that operation? Like, yes, on its face, mission failure, right? This guy knows that we can reach out and touch him sort of anywhere. So to me, that's real interesting.
You probably don't stay at your beach house that much.
Exactly, right? Right. And so those are the kind of things that are happening on a consistent basis. And I think it really speaks to the proficiency and the capability of the force.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's a craft, right? Like this whole idea of shoot, move, communicate, but also when you add in the water, when you add in jumping and all these things, I don't think people actually understand how many hours go into it as well. Like there's a I think it was a TV show called The Unit. I don't know if you ever saw this.
Yeah.
And in one of the scenes, somebody sent it to me, and the guy, I guess, he was having trouble during training and shooting, and so he went out on a weekend, and he's just at the range. He's just shooting, and he's shooting, and shooting, and he shoots so much that he's like tearing up his hand. So he basically just wraps a cloth around it. He's still shooting, still shooting. And rather than being like, is this like what the military is like? I'm like, well, hold on. There's a very big difference between like special operations and regular military. But like that is something that I think people, they associate with sports. Like, oh, you hear a story of Kobe Bryant in the gym at 4:00 in the morning or whatever. But to be able to do what you just described and insert into the water, swim for miles, go up onto a beach, get in a firefight, and then disappear. That's not luck. That's not, hey, we just woke up this morning and decided we were going to be good at this.
It's not the first time you tried that out. You had some reps.
Yeah. And the reps probably were in situations where if you messed up, you didn't get killed.
Right.
Right. Like I think that's the other piece is
back to the training piece. Right.
Yeah.
Right. You don't simulate that in the pool. Right.
When you think of the training, you went on after the SEALs to do a lot of stuff in the, I'll call it the media, just overarching, but there was special investigations. There's a lot of war correspondent work. You did a couple of different organizations. Talk a little bit as to like, were you just addicted to it? Like, hey, send me to the craziest places. Was it like, let's look around the room like you have the highest probability of coming back, so you're going whether you like it or not? Like, how do those conversations happen when you first get started?
Yeah, well, I accidentally fell into the media in my post-SEAL career. And interestingly enough, this is in my post-active duty career, but I was able to continue to stay in the reserves and continue to serve while I was doing war corresponding and while I was doing my work in media. I like to say, like, I was a SEAL in the media before it was cool to be a SEAL in the media, right?
I'm sure all of your friends love that.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're welcome, Goggins and Jocko, for me paving the way for this opportunity. So when I transitioned off active duty, I actually ended up going to graduate school and studying public policy and IR. And when I was in graduate school, we were discussing like all of these issues in this, like the lofty ivory tower of academia, right? But it was sort of abstract, right? And it was very sort of classroom oriented. Even though my professors were extraordinary, had like lots of real world experience, there was this sort of insular bubble nature to the kind of conversations. And I had been a real world practitioner of it downrange, and I really thought it was important from a mission perspective to be able to show people some of the experiences that I had downrange. And so that was the catalyst for media for me.
They didn't get it. They didn't want to understand what was happening. Like, what was your experience when you were talking to these, and how receptive were they to some of your experiences?
So I had this great professor in grad school who told this this story about a national conference of journalists, and this is a guy who wrote the definitive history of the New York Times, an esteemed Harvard professor. He actually ran the Shorenstein Center at Harvard, which was for press politics and public policy. And he told this story that he goes to this national journalism conference every year, and every year since 1955. I mean, he was pretty geriatric at the point that he was my professor, but really sharp as a tack. And he was long in the tooth. And he said when they first started this convention, they always start by parading the flag and the service flags down the middle of the aisle, and they ask anybody who had served to please stand up. And in the 50s, to pay respects and to honor the flag, right? The service flags as they came down, Army, Navy, Marine Corps. And, in the 50s and the 60s, when he went to these conventions and this happened, basically every single journalist in the room stood up because they had all served in World War II, because the entire nation had been mobilized. And he watched through Vietnam and then he said, in 2005, the year that I entered Harvard, he told me that year he had gone to the convention. They had asked every journalist in the room who had served in the military to stand up, and nobody stood up. Wow. So you had this giant disconnect between people who sort of understood war at a visceral level and the people who were telling the American public about war. And so for me—
one lifetime. In one lifetime,
right? In one lifetime, he watched the evolution, and I think that was true. It's less true now. You have more and more veterans like ourselves, right? You have this great podcast. You have more of us who are sort of talking about our experiences and helping shape the national narrative and understanding about conflict and issues of the day. But in 2005. When I got off active duty before I transitioned to the reserves, it just wasn't the case. Yep. There really weren't a lot of veterans working in the institution of media. And, this is it's a bigger problem than just in media, or it's a bigger issue than just media. There was a book that was written that year called AWOL, American Elite's Unexcused Absence from the Military.
Wow.
And he talked about, the graduating class of 1942 at Harvard, 100% of eligible males went and joined the military.
Yeah.
Because it was World War II, middle of World War II. And then he, fast forward to the year he wrote the book, I can't remember, 2004, 2003. We were actually still in the middle of war, right? 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, but not a single member of the graduating class of Harvard that year had entered the military.
Reverse is actually fascinating as well. I can't remember if it's maybe in the 60s, 70s. I'm going to get the time frame incorrect, but at one point, I think it was the Fortune 500, 87% of the CEOs were military veterans.
Yes.
And when they went and looked now, it's not zero, but it was significantly less. It was 10% or something. And the paper that I read was basically making the argument, don't be surprised. They weren't predicting it as much as just because we have sent so many for 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, you're going to then see these military veterans rise up in these organizations. The difference was 100%, right, was going in the 40s. And now it's 1% of the American population is engaged. And so, there's pluses and minuses to it. In some ways, wow, how amazing is it that only 1% of our population has to go and fight and everyone else can enjoy, the greatness of America. But at the same time, it is fascinating how different it is now.
It is a fundamental sea change. And look, I'm not a veteranophile, right? I don't think that just because you served in the military, you are going to be an extraordinary CEO or an extraordinary journalist or anything, right? We know that you and I know all too well how non-homogenous the military population and the veteran population is. But I do think that there is something to be said for that sort of cadre experience of experience. I do think that there's something to be said for, what is this? You probably know this better. What is being a veteran? It's writing a blank check for up into the value of your life to the United States government, right? There is something that is important in the national discourse and in the national leadership of having worn the cloth of the country. And I think we, as the veteran community, do add value, especially now in these like turbulent times that we're like highly partisan times that we're living in and stuff. I think actually sort of the value of uniformed service is even elevated right now.
Yeah, it is very much, if we go back to the early 2000s, right? What's the easiest way to get rid of all the partisanship? It's like there's some external threat. And if you go back and people have seen the clip, but I think it's George Bush is running out to do the first pitch at the New York Yankees game. I don't care if you're white, black, brown, green, purple, if you're Republican, Democrat, or you're, some fucking weird thing that no one actually knows about. You were an American on that day. And that sounds idealistic, but that was only 20 years ago.
Right.
Like that was not that long ago. And, there's people now who, if you think about it, are like 18 to 22 that like literally weren't born yet. Like I recently, we were working with somebody and we needed his date of birth for something. And he told me that it was 2002. And I was like, oh shit, I got to take a lap. Right. Because like you just forget. But like, so yes, some portion of people on social media and stuff like this, like literally just don't remember that stuff. But I do think that it is possible. And obviously we'd like to have more kind of cohesion without having to have the external threat. But that's just how nature has always worked, right? Is the external threat actually brings people together.
Yeah, I think about, at a micro level, I always think about combat. This is going to be platitudinal in some ways, but combat, is this thing that for me, it's always had this like clarifying effect, right? It's not like you go to combat and like you go to war and then you have some grand epiphany like, oh, life is so sweet. I'm going to enjoy every moment. I'm never going to argue. I'm a Hindu cow. I'm a Zen Buddhist monk now coming back from war. Like it's certainly not like that. And obviously with like the trauma that some people experience, it's tremendously not like that. But for me, like war has never had this like grand epiphany effect. What it's had this effect of is like racking an aperture, like bringing things into sharper focus. So when I'm home and I get to like, take a surfer, swim in the ocean, right? Like, or when I have like a good meal, like things are like slightly incrementally sweeter. They're like, they taste better. They feel better because I've had this clarifying effect. And, I hope that idea is scalable, right? That, whatever conflict is happening out there in the world for our nation, like it does bring some clarity and focus to like our national discourse and our national culture of like the things that matter, like the things that, the truth is like even in these highly partisan times, and we've been through these eras in history before, we have much more in common than we are different.
Yeah.
And the military helps teach that, which is part of the value of uniformed service.
Yeah. It also, I always say that, it's a reminder daily, like in some weird, morbid way that like, hey, unfortunately, nobody gets out alive. And so like, enjoy it, right? To some degree is like basically what you're saying.
Totally.
And I think that people who don't have that experience, they're like, oh, these guys are fucking weirdos, right? Whatever. But there is this element of, yes, there is the portion of the military who does have the traumatic experiences, but there's also a portion of the military who they're much happier people. They enjoy things. They let things go that maybe otherwise they wouldn't if they hadn't had the experience. And so it's like a very fascinating difference of response. And a lot of it has to do with the experience that they have in the military.
Totally. It is like, look, this idea is an anathema to really say at a big level, but I know Stan McChrystal's a big supporter of it. I have always been a supporter of national service to some degree, right? And even as like a unity principle and a unifying factor.
What would it look like? Like everyone goes in the military, or could it be anything?
Anything that could be national service, right? And, with one stroke of the pen in, 1962, President Kennedy created both the SEAL teams and the Peace Corps, which are these two disparate elements of national power, right? Yeah. I always thought in my 60s, I'll join the Peace Corps, then I'll have completed the loop, right? So,
in some way, they both are intended to keep the peace, just they take different tacks.
That's right. And in some ways, and there are parts of the world where the only Americans that people might know are either soldiers or Peace Corps volunteers, right? So that's how extremely important that kind of ambassadorship is. But yeah, look, I think it would basically look like, no, you can go into any of these uniformed services. It would look much like the military if you want to go right out of high school, because some people are not prepared for college, right? This would be your sort of gap service year. You could go into the Peace Corps, you could go into Teach for America, right? You could go into the military, and you would be like enlisted cadre in that organization, right? Or if you went to college and deferred your national service until post-college, then you would be as part of this kind of like junior officer leadership cadre. So we would model the other service organizations or service institutions on that sort of like military pipeline. And everybody would serve, and, college would be semi-paid for or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I haven't done the math, but like right now, like
there's a path to it making make sense.
Yeah, and especially in these polarizing times, right?
What about the media? Like, you keep mentioning polarized times, and I think people think of like, oh, my neighbor, like, what are their politics? But the media has like a very unique perspective, but also role. Like, you get to see so many different news stories, right? And you specifically went to many of the most dangerous places in the world. You used to go with a rifle. Now you're going with a camera, which is like, in some ways crazier than going with the rifle. How did you think about that as you started to get deeper and deeper into working with the media, telling some of these stories?
Well, I think in the beginning, I had a sort of semi-naive, sort of non-corporate approach to media. I had these experiences overseas. I thought they were on the bleeding edge of some of the most important issues, both nationally and both domestically and internationally. And I felt like it was part of my continued legacy and service to have those kind of conversations and to show sort of what was happening to the American public, right? So I was the first Western journalist in Mogadishu in more than a decade. I was the first person to have myself waterboarded on TV. I was in Afghanistan in 2005 doing a documentary series. All of those things, kind of the common thread, common DNA was, I thought these are important issues, and like these are the topics that Americans should be most informed on as we're having national conversations about what to do, whether is waterboarding torture? Should we continue the war in Afghanistan? Should we, be paying more attention to what's happening in places in East Africa and West Africa? So that was really the genesis. It was mission driven in the beginning, my media career. As I became more sophisticated and learned more about the institution, like I really started to understand the sort of corporate side of media. And my, the brief trajectory of my media career is I started at a startup called Current TV, Al Gore's TV network. Yeah,
created the internet and Current TV.
Uncle Al was pioneering, and that was kind of like a short form TV program ahead of its time, nonlinear cable programming format. And I was then poached by CNN, and I was correspondent for their special investigations and documentary unit. I was ingloriously fired from CNN when they cut the entire department.
Tell us the story.
It's a really weird story, and I'll just say CNN's a different organization now under different leadership. But basically, I had been mobilized out of the reserves, out of my reserve unit, and I was in West Africa in uniform in the middle of the jungle in Liberia, actually. And I got a call from like my boss at CNN, and he said, "Hey, they've cut the special investigations and documentary unit. Like, you're under contract. You can come back and go cover fires in LA or whatever. But like, basically, like, that's it. Like, half the department got fired. So, got let go. And so I then made what is either like the most brilliant or the dumbest like career move when it comes to my immediate thing. I get a call from this guy with a British accent saying like, "Hey, I'm a big fan. I watched your work, and I saw that CNN just laid off its special and its investigative unit. I'd like to do a media piece about this." And I was like, "Who is this again?" He's like, "Oh, there's like John Oliver from The Daily Show. And so then John Oliver and I created for The Daily Show a piece called Investigating Investigative Journalism, basically skewering CNN for firing its investigative journalism
It does
team.
sound like in hindsight, it does sound ridiculous, right? That like they would do that. At the time, obviously, there's money and economics and all this stuff at play, but it is hilarious.
That's exactly what it is. And the truth is that long form investigative international news, maybe news in general, has always had to be a loss leader because the media in general, and this is sort of the meat and the substance of it, has a real monetization problem, right? Like the current way, especially in the digital landscape, that media is monetized is through clicks, eyeballs, and ad revenue, right? It's always changing. It's always dynamic. But the basic thing is, newspapers create content and sell ads against them, sell digital ads against them, whether that's on Facebook or wherever else, right? In some ways, like all that news that's coming through on your Facebook feed, I call like foie gras journalism. They're kind of like stuffing it down your throat. Facebook, until very recently was really monetizing against that. And so the overall meta effect that it had, all puns intended, the meta effect of that, right, is that, and we all know this, there's nothing profound about it, is that today's current media landscape, that information is incentivized from a monetary perspective for salaciousness and clicks, clickbait, right? They're incentivized for salaciousness, not for truth. There's not a monetization model around truth and investigation, at least not like a large monetization model. And this is actually the history, at least in television, the history of television news, right? The FCC gave the three big networks, the big three, ABC, NBC, CBS, this incredibly valuable broadband spectrum, right? When they started broadcast news, right? When they started broadcast cable, like the old rabbit ear antennas, right? The FCC gave them this spectrum and they said, okay, we're going to give you this valuable radio spectrum, right? That you can broadcast your television programs on and you can, sell ads and all of this stuff on it, right? But here's the catch. We are going to mandate, right, an FCC mandate that for 1 hour a day, you do programming that informs the American public. And that's the genesis of the nightly news hour. So, Tom Brokaw and all those guys benefited from this clause that the FCC had that the big three had to do this 1 hour of like nightly network news programming that informed the American public. And that existed for generations until kind of the digital revolution and the advent of 24-hour cable news. And now we're in this era of sort of atomization of news and information everywhere, right? So like, back then CNN made, everything's reinventing and transforming and eating itself.
Bundling and unbundling.
Exactly, right? But back then, like CNN disrupted the big three model, right? And now you have digital sort of disrupting that cable news model. And we're just in this incredibly fractured news and information ecosystem. I describe it as having the effect of, it's as if somebody hit Mercury with a sledgehammer. And that's how our information environment is right now. And all of the things that we thought were supposed to bring us closer together and connect us, like social media platforms and stuff, what we're realizing now, at least in this current iteration of it, is that it's actually having the effect of siloing us and driving us apart, right? One of the big challenges I think that we're facing as a society is this sort of tribalism that's coming from the ghettoization of news and information. And this is a tough problem to solve. There are not a lot of easy solutions for it. And I think you see the permutations and the second and third order effects of that playing out throughout our culture, throughout our politics. And that's where we're living these days, man.
Yeah. When I think of your media career, there's two specific moments I want to talk about. The first is when you got waterboarded on television. So we didn't know each other at this time, but I was in Iraq when all of the kind of the initial papers came out and the enhanced interrogation techniques and like all this. And you can imagine where like somebody had the internet, right? And it was like, what happened? And so the waterboarding stuff came out. And I remember a guy walked in, it's a little area we were all sitting, and he was like, what is it? They're like, well, how hard could that fucking be? And we went outside and like literally laid down. And now it wasn't the same thing in terms of the feet above the head or whatever, but we basically laid down, put a towel over someone's head, poured water. How long did you go? Right. And then it turns into a competition and guys are like timing. And of course, no one lasts more than like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like in our heads, we were like idiot kids, essentially. I was 20 or 21 years old, screwing around, trying to pass time, in the middle of Iraq. And then you did it on national television. And I think that at some point, like, I don't think any of us knew who you were or that you were doing or anything, but like, I remember just being like, oh shit, somebody from uniform went and did on national television.
Yeah.
And in some ways it was like started from the bottom, now we're here, right? Like somebody pulled it off. But the media and like, I think the nation in general was like, oh shit, like somebody is actually going to show us what this is. And so like, how did that happen?
That was my first big like breakout piece, right? And just
you were viral before viral was a thing.
Yeah, so early. This whole thing is making me sound prehistoric, Still alive. And just to be fair, that was the second time I'd been waterboarded. I'd been waterboarded in SEER training, know, and it was.
So you knew what it was.
I knew what it was. And that first time, in SEER, which is this, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, you have all this stuff you're not supposed to tell them or whatever. They put me on that waterboard and I'm like, I'm a SEAL Team 1. What do you want to know? What do you want to know? It's pretty bad, as you know, as you experience.
Well, to be clear, the watered down version, no pun intended, is all it made me think was I forget the gentleman's name. I think it was in Guantanamo. They waterboarded me 182 times or something.
KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah, and all I kept thinking to myself was like, dude, maybe I could survive one or two. Like, if you had to do it 181 times, like I'd be telling you anything that you want to hear.
Totally.
Right.
Side note: they are not sure that they ever broke KSM. They defined him as like a super resistor or whatever. Really interesting dude. Still down there at Gitmo, architect of 9/11 and all that stuff. So how, why?
So your idea or somebody else's idea?
100% my idea.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah. And there's like two funny stories that come out of it. Like the first is at CNN, that was the first time I was on national TV.
Okay.
Right. And so Anderson Cooper, who I consider a friend, good journalist, came from the same kind of like investigative DNA background that I did. Anderson called me up after the piece and he's like, Kaj, it's amazing that you pulled this off. Like he asked me the same thing you did. Like, how did you do it? He's like, cause I've been looking into it for a while and, all I could find was like, these weird S&M groups to do it to me. And I was like, it's the world you walk in, Anderson, That's
you should definitely have them come do it on national television.
Yeah, exactly. No, look, basically the impetus was this. That debate was raging in the national security community. Guys like you and I and within the military, it had sort of trickled out and was bubbling up and people are saying like, should we be doing this? Is it torture? John McCain had actually kind of gone to war with the White House. I was a big John McCain fan. He came and spoke when I was a plebe at the Naval Academy. I had read the book about him, Nightingale's Song, and I had tremendous amount of respect for what he had been through. And obviously they talk about McCain and those guys at SEER school, right? A lot of the stuff is modeled on what those guys went through at the Hanoi Hilton. So I thought he was a really credible voice in this debate. And so this debate was happening and I would see the White House like doing talking points. I'd see McCain kind of raging about them. And then I'd see all the pundits, sort of saying stuff. And I was like, this is the most surreal, bizarre debate because we're talking about this thing that nobody's ever seen and like doesn't really have any experience with except for guys like us. So I was like, look, let's just open the kimono and show people what it is since we're having the debate. And I thought that's how I could best be of service. And for me, it was a moral position that if we're going to have informed debates, like we need to know what we're talking about. And that's where I saw my value of bridging these two worlds between the military and the media.
Yeah. When you're like, all right, cool, I think that we should do it on television, and you call the producer or whoever, like, are they like, hell yeah, like, let's do it? Or are they like, let's call the lawyers and make sure that like, something doesn't go wrong?
Actually, everybody said no. The lawyers, everybody. This is a story lost to history or whatever. But you know who said yes? Was Al Gore.
Really?
Al thought it was important. And he overrode all of the lawyers, I think the CEO or the COO of the company definitely overrode the general counsel, the GC of the company. He said like, no, this is too important. Like, let Kaj do it. And that was the genesis of it. I don't think I've ever even told that story to anyone ever, but that's how it happened.
The lawyers are there. They're supposed to be the risk killers, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is pretty damn risky. And to some degree, do you feel like it changed the conversation?
I do.
Once people saw it?
I do. Like, in journalism, your wins are few and far between, right? Especially these days, right? So I'm happy to hang my hat a little bit on that one and say, like, I think that was fundamentally different. It also sparked a whole series of media coverage around it. So there was a lot that happened from kind of like throwing that stone in the lake and watching the ripple effect. I mean, up to and including several other pieces, another Emmy nominated piece that I did where I interviewed Jim Mitchell, who I consider a friend. He was the architect of that enhanced interrogation program. I interviewed him. He had never spoken before. He had personally waterboarded Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, those 180 odd times. He was the guy who did it. I interviewed.
And this is really important because I don't think people actually understand, as part of the enhanced interrogation techniques, there was the waterboarding, which I think probably took the cake in the coverage. And it was something that is easy to now see on television or on movies and kind of gets recreated over and over again. But there was also things like they told one of I think it was one of the guys, he was really scared of insects. And so they told him, they were like, hey, if this insect bites you, it'll kill you. Right. And they put him in a box, which is essentially like almost like a coffin-sized box or whatever. And they put the insect in there, and it was not a poisonous, killer insect. Yeah. But to some degree, truth is what you believe, right? And so this dude definitely thought that they were going to kill him, right? And so it brought up the debate of, like, actually not only is there the physical component of it, but the psychological component as well. And waterboarding is unique in that it has both of them to some degree. And so, like, that whole time was weird, because I think it's hard for people to recognize something that from the outside, idiot, we put you in a box and, like, there's an insect that can't do anything to you. On the other end, it's like there's a psychological component there that's pretty powerful.
Totally, completely. And I think these were fundamental questions, especially at that time. Like, what techniques are appropriate to use? Like, where do we draw the line, right? Obviously, John McCain was adamantly against anything that broached up to the line of torture. And I think that was important. I think for you and I, who both served, right, deep to our sort of core ideology and sense of self, that we served honorably, right? We both, like, on our DD 214, the paper you get when you discharge, have that, making a giant assumption here that we both have honorable discharges.
I don't know about you, but I do, but yes.
Okay, me too. All right, good. Glad we got that out of the way, right? Like, that honorable discharge is really important to me, and I want my time in uniform to be remembered honorably. And so things that can impugn that, sometimes they're necessary, or things that have the potential to impugn that. So look, there was at the time, and still is, like, a robust national debate on how we sort of gain intelligence and information. I think this was an important thing. And as part of that ripple effect, I put Jim Mitchell on TV for the first time, talking from his perspective. And I think I gave him a really fair shake, although a weird shake. I interviewed him here in Florida in a canoe surrounded by alligators, because I thought it was a great metaphor for how he saw the world, right? And that piece also got nominated for an Emmy. And that piece led to a movie with Adam Driver and Annette Bening called The Report, which was about this subject. So look, most of 90% of the things you do in journalism kind of go out there into the ether and don't affect policy or don't affect the national discourse like anything else. You just, sort of keep plugging. I do think that one helped shape the national discourse. So I'm proud of it.
Yeah. The other moment that I recently was reminded of, Clarissa Ward from CNN was in Afghanistan during the Afghan pullout. And I think the nation, or at least folks that I talked to on a daily basis, they were very surprised to see a woman there surrounded by the Taliban, and she's, like, interviewing them, right? And it was this weird kind of cognitive dissonance of, like, everything that they had assumed or thought about was being shaken, but also they understood that, like, this is a very dangerous situation. Why? Because she's literally like, oh, wait, they're shooting at somebody, and she's, like, talking about this live. And what it reminded me of is you did a piece with Vice very early on, I think, where you were actually in, I think it was a plane, and it was in Nigeria with Boko Haram. And for whatever reason, it was probably one of a bunch of pieces of early Vice that I'd watched. But I remember this because you're like, and now they're shooting at Boko Haram, and there's like a guy hanging out to the side with like a machine gun. He's just like,
PKM.
Yeah. And you're like, you can just tell like you're much more comfortable than I think like a normal journalist would be.
Yeah.
And so like in those situations, like it's one thing with current TV and like, hey, we're going to waterboard you, but it's somewhat of a controlled environment and like it's on national television, but like you know what you're getting yourself into. Going into these conflict zones, very different. Like whether it's Clarissa, whether it's you doing some of the stuff, like how did you think about like when to say yes? And like, did you ever say, actually, I don't think that that's one that we should go do for whatever reason?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, like the great white whale, the stories that got away are just the ones that I didn't get to do for whatever reason. Anything, any operation, any mission, any journalism assignment that I tried to do is always a risk-benefit calculus. And there are just some times where it's not worth it. And then there are other times where you push the envelope. I remember there was this former problem of Somalis fleeing to Yemen there's unfortunately now a reverse migration because Yemen's one of the most dangerous places in the world. So Somalis actually returning to Somalia. But for a while, because Mogadishu and the rest of Somalia was so dangerous, there were Somali refugees like taking these boats across the Sea of Aden or the Red Sea to the Yemeni coast.
Okay.
And somebody had told me, a friend from the human rights community had told me that you could go to a beach in Yemen and set up cameras and that bodies would just wash up on the beach. And it sounded apocryphal. It sounded like something like, yeah, right. People say that stuff, but they're being hyperbolic. No, I went there and it was like absolutely true because these boats were so rickety and shaky bringing these refugees across. And Somalis, as we said earlier, don't really swim that well quite often. The boats were capsizing, they're drowning. And you just set up a camera on the beach and you'd wait till morning, till sunrise. And bodies would just wash up on the beach. Wow. So I was trying to get a smuggler to take me on one of the boats to go across. In the end, I couldn't make it work. Yeah, I can't remember. I think it was like a 2-day journey or something.
So you couldn't swim, like you yourself wouldn't be able to probably swim.
Well, I wouldn't go that far down.
Given it was,
No.
Tens of miles.
Not swimmable. Swimmable, quite sharky, all of that stuff. I think most of these people were drowning within sight of shore. And the reason being is that the Yemeni Coast Guard was patrolling at the time. The smugglers would dump them and go.
I don't think people actually understand this specific situation. I don't know anything about, but even on the American borders, right? When you look at some of these videos, and I've talked to people who are border patrol and things like that around these rivers that they're crossing, like. If you were a person who didn't have a reason to go across that was life or death or you wanted to get to America or something like that, you probably wouldn't cross, right? Like they're dangerous things to do. And we're talking about walking in many cases or swimming across a river that you can see the other side. You're talking about here of like basically going on a 2-day voyage and like hope we're heading in the right direction.
Oh, right? Yeah. With like 300 people crammed in. The conditions were supposed to be atrocious. The reason that I wanted to do a story like that, obviously the story has changed many years later, is like, there's a human component to that. And again, like we're talking about all of these policies and all of these ideas. And I think especially in policy, like I have a master's in policy, right? I get the policy world, but quite often we lose the human dynamic and the human factor. And that's where journalism and cameras and filmmaking and storytelling can sort of bring us closer to the reality of a situation. I wouldn't ask anybody to cross the Red Sea in a raft with Somali refugees, but I do think that the power in its highest form, in its most altruistic form, that's what good journalism can be.
How did you convince cameramen to go with you? Or did you sometimes just say, "Fuck it, give me the camera and I'll be back"?
I every once in a while I've done that. Like that was actually a Hind helicopter that you're describing in northern Nigeria. Every once in a while I've had to shoot it myself. Like the cameraman on that one went home. It was very dangerous. But in all these communities in the world, like I think for better or for worse, guys like you and me find like-minded people, right? So I was doing stunts on water stunts on the Jack Ryan series, kind of like a side hustle, fun hobby of mine is to do stunt work occasionally, and I was sitting with this like crew of stuntmen, like as we were preparing to do a stunt, and I was like, oh. These guys are just like frogmen, if there was no rules about like, felony convictions or college degrees or anything like that. It's the same sort of adventurous, risk-taking DNA. I always thought like it's amazing. That's why I loved the SEAL teams so much and so close to the guys that I served with. I love when you take that gene, that like adrenaline chasing, call it courage, whatever that ingredient, whatever that human quality is, and then you channel it for a mission and purpose. And I think that's the real secret sauce, the real secret power of the special operations community. And it frankly, it multiplies out to the conventional services as well. Anybody who is willing to put themselves in harm's way or to take risk for a higher purpose, that goes a long way in my book.
There's a story that I didn't know until recently. Dakota Meyer.
Dakota's great.
So he told the story in a way where, for those that don't know, he was awarded Medal of Honor. Him and a driver drove back and forth into a village under heavy fire, risked their life, all this stuff. But he told the kind of pre-story before those actions, and basically he was going to be on a mission. He gets told he was basically raising too many concerns and kind of giving people a hard time, supposedly, and said, "Hey, why don't you just go sit up there and let us go do the mission?" And when he gets in the truck, he basically says to the driver, "Hey, shit may go bad today. When it does, get the fuck out of the driver's seat, and I'm going to go save them." And the driver, who in many cases, these Humvees and stuff, they're not actual just the driver, right? They have other responsibilities or whatever. He was like, "You're not going anywhere without me." Right. And there's this element of, I think a lot about like courage is contagious as well. And so when you see one person do it, all of a sudden everyone is like, well, we can all do it, right? And I do think that's part of the beauty of the military in general, but also the special operations community is that like, you just need one person to be like, guys, we can do this.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, everyone's like, well, fuck yeah, let's go do it.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, you might think that OKEx sounds like a new genius football formation. It's actually not. Charlie?
It's your new favorite crypto trading app.
You heard the man.
OKEx, come on!
So true and so inspiring. Also, the contrapositive is true. Like so is fearfulness, right? And I remember in Buds, like, so many lessons are sort of forged there on the sand. Guys rarely quit alone.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, so you'll be sitting there in the surf, locked arm in arm, middle of the night. Everybody's jackhammering because their body's so cold it's trying to generate heat or whatever. And the bell, that alluring like gold bell, is right over there. And you'll see like guys whispering like, "Hey, like I'll quit if you quit," kind of thing.
No way.
And then they just start sprinting in twos for the bell. Right. So I totally heed your point and honor it. And I'm adding an additional point that it works both ways.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way, but that is fascinating that nobody wants to quit alone.
And so what's the lesson there, right? Like careful who you surround yourself with.
Yeah. Absolutely. Did you see Jack Carr's the terminal list?
Yeah.
What'd you think of it?
I thought it was good, right? Like, look, I'm happy whenever anybody is able to take their experience. I tried to do this myself, take their experience and evolve into a new chapter and be in the sort of creative industries. Like, do I think the plot line, like, as a still, a lieutenant commander in the SEAL teams, right? Like, do I think that lieutenant commanders are going rogue and like killing their own platoons? Like, I do not. Like, that part's a little preposterous. But in terms of like,
makes it for a good book.
Makes for a great book. Yeah. I just want to say like, we are not doing that. Like the dudes that I served with, the admirals that I served with, like are some among the finest Americans I've ever met in my whole life. But yeah, look, it's so awesome to see Jack, pseudonym, to see Jack, to see him thrive and succeed in the creative endeavors, and have that's Amazon, right?
Yes.
That's what, on to have like on a big streaming outlet and like all of these accolades and like Good on you, man.
One of the things that I took away from it was I knew that a lot of military veterans were doing training for movies and things like that. And I always joke that like if you ever watch a movie and like somebody's like holding a gun the wrong way or whatever, you're like, oh, yeah. And now there's even a whole vein of I don't know if you've seen a lot of SEALs and Special Forces guys, whatever, they do reaction videos on YouTube. And they're like, that's just not real. But this one was one I thought very well done, but also two, I was like, oh shit, like I never thought about all these lived experiences that people had for 20 years. Like they are going to come to books, they are going to come to movies, they're going to come to these media platforms that I think most Americans haven't seen that stuff in a long time.
Now is the time, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't like a bunch of great Vietnam movies, right? Apocalypse Now like didn't get made until, a decade after Vietnam, right? Like there takes some cultural maturation that has to happen for all these products. And I mean, some of it is just like us getting out of the service and finding our legs in the civilian world. But like, I think that time period is now happening. Like, and it's also like a time of reflection, right? In some ways we've certainly wound down Afghanistan. Like we've wound down the global war on terror. In fact, I just read that I think the National Defense Ribbon as an automatic, remember that sort of like participation ribbon that everybody gets, the National Defense Ribbon because we're in a time of war. I think that's going away as an automatic, signaling that we are ebbing from the global war on terror. And so I think now is a time for reflection on the two longest wars in American history. Culture, pop culture are some of the best ways to do it, And I'm proud of guys like Jack Carr, being able to use the creative industries to do that kind of storytelling. Like we're certainly not the only voice and the only lived experience in America, but over 2 million of us in uniform during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, like we're a part of the fabric of American society.
Yeah. When you think of kind of your post military career, you did a lot of what I'll call the war correspondent and media work. Now you have, I would, from my outside view, kind of three different legs. You have some humanitarian work, things like Team Rubicon and others. You still go to some of these areas. So I believe you've gone to Ukraine a couple of times now. And then you also are participating in building technology and products and stuff like that kind of straddle the line between great tech products, but also help the military community. I thought maybe we could just kind of talk through each one of those. And the humanitarian piece to me is something that isn't surprising, but you have a very wide variety of things that you participate in, from swimming to the Team Rubicon stuff. So like talk through a little bit as to like some of that work and like why choose some of the things you've chosen to do.
Yeah. Well, I will just caveat that like Ukraine was a total aberration.
Okay.
I did not intend to go to Ukraine. I got out of the SEAL Reserves in 2017. I thought I was done going to war. I made this transition, as you indicated, from the media into money, right? Where I have this fintech company that I'm super proud of. And I really thought I was done. In fact, I was 2 months into my startup when I had the really wonderful conversation with my co-founder. Like, hey, I know we just launched this great new startup guild. Like things are humming along, things are awesome. But like, we're so early stage that we've never even talked about vacation policy. But everybody gets vacation, right? So I'm going to take my vacation and take a little sabbatical and go to Ukraine because I feel morally compelled to do so. But what it does, the Ukraine mission does fit into this like kind of, my portfolio is really divided in half. It's my, and the Venn diagram overlaps a lot. There's the humanitarian service-oriented work that I do, my philanthropic work, and I did that for a decade. It helped start an organization using my combat pay called The Mission Continues. That led to, and served on the board there. That was about giving veterans a sense of purpose and giving them an opportunity to do public service. And then that led to us giving a grant to Team Rubicon to start Team Rubicon. I also sat on the board at Team Rubicon, again, humanitarian work in disaster zones. So I spent And now I'm part of a team called Force Blue, which takes former combat divers, repurposes their skills for ocean conservation. It's awesome. It's actually based right here in Miami. We all became scientific divers for the Frost Science Center downtown here in Miami. So we go out, we do coral restoration, we do turtle rescue missions. It's pretty awesome. Like as a frogman, it gets me back in the water with a sense of mission and purpose. So I have for the last decade, concurrent with my media career in parallel, I've been really oriented in the veteran service space. And I've spent a decade trying to give veterans a sense of mission and purpose. But what I've come to realize in this next chapter in my life, and we started this company this past Veterans Day. We launched on November 11th. And so we're coming up on that was our beta, but we're coming up on essentially our 1-year anniversary. What I started to realize is that sense of veterans' purpose is really important. And it's what economists call necessary, but not sufficient.
Oh, interesting.
If we are not just giving veterans a renewed sense of mission and purpose, but we're not also paying attention to their purse and to their sense of financial security, their sense of financial stability, their long-term financial health and wellness, like all of the mission stuff in the world isn't going to matter, right? And all the problems that we hear in the military community and the veterans community, a lot of those are magnified by this lack of financial stability and planning, and financial health and wellness and lack of financial literacy. So basically the way it started for me is like, the analog here is like, people talk about, meditation. And there's a lot of talk in the wellness space. Like you and I are big fitness buffs, right? Like I do a lot in the fitness space. I owned a CrossFit gym for many years, right? That's how I keep my knife sharp, is by pushing the envelope physically. And even a lot of the veterans events are like, swims around the Hudson and all of that stuff. It's all part of like keeping my mind, body sharp. But when I think in the wellness space, there's all this talk about mindfulness and meditation. Really important stuff, really valuable stuff. But you can go meditate for 30 minutes in the morning. And then if you come back to like a trove of credit card companies, right, telling you how much debt you have, like all of that mindfulness and all of that Zen is out the window. And in the military community, I don't know what your transition was like, but in large part, the military community has been left behind by the private wealth community.
Without a doubt.
Right. When you got out of the service, right, did you do TAPS?
Yeah.
The transition program?
I think when we came back from Iraq, there was like a yellow ribbon program.
Yeah.
And it was like a day.
Yeah.
And it was like, bring your families. And like everyone like showed up and was like, all right, we sat in like an auditorium. They tried. Like to be fair, it was very well intentioned, but it's hard when you're talking to a room full of, I don't know, a couple hundred people, and every single person is literally completely different. Like how do you talk to the commander and the, private first class about the same issues? Like it's just different.
And it starts at day one when we enter the military, right? I'm sure you're aware they've changed the retirement system in the military, right? So you enter the military, you're 17, you're 18 years old, you're a recruit, you're going to boot camp, and then you get to your first training station or your first duty station, right? And it's hard in general to get 17 and 18-year-olds to think about their long-term financial future, right? I bet I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say you either have a personal story or like some friends who did some pretty stupid things with their money.
I remember being in Iraq, and there was, I don't know how old the kid was. He was young, and like he was like, I have no money, and we were like, dude, like everything you're earning here is tax free up to whatever point, $87,000, whatever. What do you mean you have no money? And he was like, walked you through his financial decisions, and you were like, if you wrote down like everything not to do, like this kid checked every single box, and like thankfully the military was giving him food and a place to sleep and like all this stuff. But I was like, wow. And it was just like very egregious things. And then you realize like, yeah, this kid he's never been in this position before, and no one's ever told him not even what to do to grow wealth, just like how do you understand to spend less than you make?
Right.
Right. I mean, like it's simple stuff.
Simple budgeting.
Yeah.
Right. And there is that financial literacy gap is huge. And I think we saw it over and over. And the bad news is that there are a lot of forces aligned against military members when it comes to finances, right? So
explain a couple of them.
Well, just first and foremost, there's a pay gap relative to their sort of civilian counterparts. The second is, there's been a change in the military retirement system, right? So, what used to be a defined benefit system has gone to a contribution-based system, so the TSP, right? That's not necessarily bad, but you're asking 17 and 18-year-olds now to make complex decisions about their financial future without the preparation and the financial literacy that's required for it. And then there's just like a predatory environment. So I went to jump school back then. The Army owned the air pipeline. So I went to jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia. Were you ever there? Like,
No,
you never got to Benning? Okay.
Yeah.
But it's like every other military base with a Ville on the outside. You know the Ville, right? So you walk outside the gates and there's, what is it? Strip clubs, tattoo parlors, some payday loans, and a used car dealership and bars, right? So I mapped from Fort Benning, Georgia, where I went to basic parachutist school, to the first, from the main gate to the first used car dealership with an over 20% interest rate, 0.7 miles. You can walk, if you don't have a car, from the main gates of Fort Benning, Georgia, to that first used car dealership and get your new Mustang because you have like a regular government
Mustang.
paycheck. Got to get that Mustang, right? 20% interest, right? And people have no idea. They don't understand compounding interest, right? They don't understand what that effect is. So there's this predatory environment out there, right? There's cultural, there's predatory headwinds. And even in like today's day and age, like we look at inflation, right? Inflation has hit the military community harder than the civilian community, partially because our pay rates are set by Congress, right? And that takes a political process to change. Our sort of economic equivalents, blue-collar workers who might be in unions and stuff, can pivot, they can change their contracts, they can do things to adjust with the pace of inflation faster than the military did, right? In addition to just a sort of lower wages in general.
And the size, I think a lot of people forget the size of the military kind of base. When you make 1-2% adjustments, it's a lot of money the swing of amount of capital that is now going to be allocated from a budget standpoint is very large.
Right. So actually, the administration and Congress passed a 3.7% military pay raise this year. Sounds good, right? But inflation's running at 9%. So the military, to my mind, got a 6% pay cut this year. And so you see this environment and it's translating into all kinds of things, right? 84% of military families cite financial stress as the number one household issue.
Wow.
The Army is going to miss its recruiting goal by half this year, by half, right? So there's all these second and third order effects of it. And luckily, DOD is waking up to this reality. In fact, I just saw that, I think it was the Joint Chiefs helped, push through this augmented bill that will help keep military members above the poverty line.
Wow.
This is a sad day when our uniformed members are living below the poverty line. So the environment is tough. The DOD has not sufficiently prepared young military members and veterans, the military community, in terms of financial health and wellness. So because I had spent all this time in veteran service and with this mission of helping veterans, I realized that my new calling, my new purpose was to really embark on this path to help close that wealth gap, right? The best way to do it is, or one of the good ways to do it is through financial education and training, and the other is through investing. So I created this platform along with two other naval officers, two Navy intel officers actually, because we needed some big brains and not just a Paleolithic knuckle dragger, You
needed it all to be successful.
Right. Yeah. Intel drives operations, So, my co-founder's 20-year Wall Street veteran. We looked at this pay gap, or we looked at this wealth gap between the military and civilian community, and we saw that there was no company out there serving the military for private wealth. You would have thought that USAA traditionally had that market locked up. I'm a USAA member. In fact, I just bought homeowners insurance through USAA this morning, right? I actually love USAA. I think they're awesome. But a couple of years ago, they sold off their investing arm to Charles Schwab. Right. So you literally go on the USAA website, click invest, it'll redirect you to the Charles Schwab website. No affiliation with the military community. So we saw a need out there for a company that had military ingrained in its DNA to help increase the financial health and wellness in the military community. So our big over the horizon North Star goal is to raise $50 billion in wealth for the military community. We do that by getting, several million military members and their families investing accounts worth, if we can get all of those families to get $10,000 worth of an investment account, we'll achieve our goal. The way we do it is the same way we do it in the military, right? Like through training and education. And we actually believe in this so much. So we've created a curriculum on our platform, a knowledge curriculum, and that has simple things on it like savings versus investing. What your buddy who had no money in Iraq the video he really needed to watch.
I don't know if I want to claim buddy status. So I'm going to say colleague.
Your battle buddy. What that 58-second video, if he had watched that and answered two simple questions on savings versus investing, we'd put $5 in his brokerage account to start to invest. So what the platform is essentially is a self-directed investing platform, fractional shares, zero commissions, and we're trying to get people started on that investing journey, right? So that they can build long-term financial health and wealth.
And what's fascinating is just telling someone, hey, you can do this, right, is incredibly empowering. But the second thing is understanding the perspective they're coming from. I think it is an underrated thing in these scenarios because people are like, oh, okay, the military, whatever. Like there are certain things that these people will go through. Divorce is a incredibly high rate in the military, especially with young military members versus kind of their civilian peers. And when you start thinking about all of these components that actually are financial aspects of their life, realizing that and being able to build a product, it makes sense that, of course, people are going to flow there. They'll say, hey, you understand me, you have the products that I need, and if you can just get in front of them and get them there, then why wouldn't it work?
Today's episode is brought to you by FTX US. They're a safe, regulated way to buy Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. They've got very cheap fees, sometimes as much as 85% cheaper than their competitors. There's also no minimum fees, there's no withdrawal fees, or any other hidden fees. Ultimately, FTX US is trying to make it dead simple for you to buy Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. They also now have digital stock trading as well, with no transaction fees and no payment for order flow. All you have to do is go download the FTX app today from the App Store and use code POMP, and you'll get some money back every single time you trade $10 or more. Again, go download the FTX app today, use code POMP, and every time you trade $10 or more, they'll go ahead and they'll give you some crypto back. The more you trade, the more you earn. Download the FTX app today.
100%. And look, to be clear, our platform's open to anybody. Like by investing, by holding your portfolio on the Guild platform, you support the military community. And one of the ways you do that is our curriculum, that knowledge curriculum I was talking about, is literally some of it is good general financial advice, but we have a whole tab called Military Money that's designed specifically for the circumstances you just mentioned, like, how to read your leave and earnings statement, right? How to invest in the TSP, or what happens if you PCS, if you change your station, right? A lot of military folks are being moved to a different area, 18 months, 24-year, 3-year cycles, like much more frequently than their civilian counterparts. And those have, as you said, those are really have economic implications, right? So we have an entire section of our knowledge curriculum, training and education devoted just to military specific circumstances. And so
the platform is completely open. It's a fintech platform that anyone can use. So whether you are a service member or you're not, you can use it. And really the idea is for the service members, there are now all of these different features and products that other fintech applications have, but they are specifically designed with you in mind and kind of serve the needs that you have. But also, if you are not in the military and you simply want to support the military, you can go ahead and use this application, and some of the resources and time and energy of that team and stuff is going to help the military as well.
That's exactly it. And we like to say, and I fundamentally believe that money moves at the speed of trust. People will invest their money, they'll hold their money, they'll let other people be custodians of their portfolios with people that they trust. And for me, there's a large trust gap in the financial market, especially with the military. And look, I don't expect anybody to invest on our platform just because we wore the uniform and our military folks. Trust doesn't work that way. Trust is earned, right? What we do think is that through our experience and through the platform itself, you'll see that trust. And one of the things, while I'll put our platform up against any of the other, apps and companies out there where there are lots of places to hold that people can hold their money, right? And some of them are quite excellent. And because we have a social mission just to help the military community in general, like the most important thing for me is to get military personnel and veterans investing in their future. Whether you do that on our platform or another platform is fine. One of the things that I believe increases the trust of our platform is not just that we all served in the military and we have this shared experience, but also the platform itself, right, is built around trust and transparency. So if you think about the two biggest barriers to entry for investing, it's people think they don't have enough money, and even if they did, they don't know where to invest their money. You break down that we don't have enough money by allowing fractional share investing. So you can start investing with as little as $1, right? And so that sort of takes that out of the equation. And then the other piece is the knowledge piece, and we talked about the knowledge curriculum, but the sort of third leg of the triangle there is trust and transparency. And so one of the features, the way our platform is designed, is that everybody comes on, they get an anonymous username. And actually, you'll see they also hashtag. So you'll see people grouping by like hashtag Army, hashtag Navy SEALs, right?
Course.
So you can actually check out on our platform how the Army portfolio, how all the hashtag Army folks are performing. But you get this.
Just tell us who's outperforming who.
I mean, it's Navy, of course. It is not.
That was like a softball, so you could tee off.
But it's not true.
Yeah.
You know the answer. It's the Air Force.
Yeah, of course.
Because they have all this time to
When I was in
invest.
Iraq, I remember we walked by some Air Force guys, and they had very, very, very nice area to stay in. And one of them said a comment that I will forever never forgive anyone in the Air Force. They were like, "Oh yeah, if we had to stay with you guys, we would get hazard pay."
Totally.
And I remember being like, literally, like that does look to be the truth here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is like it's easy to get those stock tips on your nice golf courses, right?
Absolutely. So, but there is this grouping by service.
There is. That's one of the many ways that you can organize, and there's actually some interesting data around, how these different communities are performed. But more importantly, so full trust and transparency, like everybody gets an anonymous username. I'm Gilded Frog 1. You can literally be on the platform. Every day we rack and stack people, and I took this straight out of CrossFit, like a whiteboard, or straight out of a Peloton. We rack and stack the top performing portfolios in the platform by day, week, and month. So you can literally go onto this leaderboard, right? And you can say, "Oh, there, Gilded Frog 1. He's number 3 on the leaderboard. I want to see what he's holding." You can click into there, and you can see not by dollar amount, but by percentage what they're holding in their portfolio.
Got it.
And you can see wow, this person, like the market was down on Friday, right? Because of all this stuff about Fed rates and all about interest rates being raised by the Fed and stuff. Market's down, but you go, wow, this portfolio's up 11%. That's incredible gains. How did they do that? Click in and you can see okay, he's holding, XYZ of this percentage of investment, right? And so you can actually see what these people are holding. So that not only increases trust and transparency, it's also a learning tool. It's a peer-to-peer mentorship kind of learning tool. And if you think about how most people are getting their financial advice, like Reddit, right? Or
I'm fascinated with the TikTok 22-year-old who is dropping the knowledge of how they're going to retire by 35.
Yeah. No, all of these financial, YouTube, Reddit, TikTok, all the 300% gains, all of this stuff. Okay, that may be true. or it may not be true. And that to me is like one of the real problems with this like ecosystem of financial information out there is that we don't actually have any verification processes on what's happening on Reddit. We don't know how true that is. Somebody could claim they had these giant gains, but on our platform, you can see in real time with real conviction what people are investing in and how they're performing. And that kind of transparency doesn't really exist, right? And like, you know, if you have a financial advisor, right? The old, like, if you're such a good financial advisor, how come you're not rich, right?
I prefer to use Warren Buffett's Wall Street's the only place where people take, I think, their Bentleys to take advice from people who ride the subway.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because if Warren Buffett says it, then you're not a troll. Then you're just merely repeating the financial gods comments.
Totally. Well, or I was actually a guest of the Buffetts at Berkshire Hathaway conference this year. You know what they call Woodstock for capitalists.
Yes.
And he said a similar thing. Like, you know, he's got themes, right?
Yes.
And he said, oh yeah, financial advisors are people who know. You know, it's like people who know nothing about the stock market being advised by people who know even less. You know,
exactly.
You know, so and that's part of the reason that we think, one, self-directed investing is important, that people have to take control of their financial future, and two, that we believe that this transparency piece is really important. The ability to look at real time conviction of how portfolios are performing, about how people's portfolios are performing, and to use that as a model and a mentorship tool. Of course, it requires research. Of course, it requires people to be educated about what they're doing, but it's sort of a start, and we think that differentiates us. We also have a really interesting thing that came out of Naval Intelligence School. So my co-founder, Naval Intelligence Officer, was at DAMNEC going through Naval Intelligence Officer Training School. They studied this case of the USS Scorpion, which was essentially discovered in 1968 using a collective intelligence approach. Goldman Sachs has a very similar thing called the Goldman Sachs VIP index, where they use this sort of aggregation of top performing stocks. You know, lots of sort of financial products use this kind of approach to collective intelligence. We've taken that model, we've put it on the Guild platform. We aggregate the top 30 holdings on the Guild portfolio, and it's this idea, this James Surowiecki idea of the wisdom of crowds, that, you know, none of us is smarter than all of us, right? And what we've seen, even in this down market where the S&P is, you know, still off, you know, 13% on the year, that the Guild portfolio, this collective intelligence portfolio that we have, is outperforming the S&P pretty substantially. So anyways, that's sort of like nerding out about the tools and the wickets and the design of the platform. But the meta point is that, you know, I think we have built the most trusted and transparent investing platform out there, and it's open to anyone, but its fundamental mission is to serve the military community. And you could make the argument that there's no community that's sort of more deserving to, you know, participate in the wealth growth of the United States.
Yeah. And it feels like there's a lot of people who they simply just want to support the military, right? Like there's people who say, hey, in like the crypto world, people always ask me like, where's the decentralized Twitter? I'm like, no one's leaving Twitter for decentralized Twitter, right? Like it has to be a 10x better product. Here, actually, though, buying stocks, you can do it on a lot of different platforms. But I do think that even if that's all you did, right? You didn't even build something better, which I think you guys are building something better. But if you didn't do that, there's still a lot of people who'd say, hey, I'd rather just support the military and do it on a platform that understands how important that organization is to our country.
Yeah. You know, as a tech entrepreneur, you know this. Well, you have all these wild ideas, all these theories about how things are going to work, right? And then you hit the mat with Jocko, you know, and Jocko, you know, armbar crucifixions you, and like your reality comes crashing down. At least that's my lived experience, right? But no, you have all these like wild ideas as a tech entrepreneur, and then every once in a while, you get sort of proof positive data points that some of your hypotheses are true, right? So we launched this company in beta on Veterans Day last year. We went live January 1st, and we really did it pretty front sight focused with the military community in mind. But we had this sort of inkling of an idea that supporters, that there's this patriot affinity market out there, people who want to support the military community and will sort of put their money where their mouth is, not as a donation. Like I know this very well that people will do that from a donation world, but from an investment perspective, that they will invest on, platforms like ours. And as we have gone out and we've, I was speaking to 350 Marines at Camp Pendleton the other day. Like I'm speaking to the ROTC unit at Notre Dame in 2 weeks. As I've continued to go out and stay focused on this core audience of like raising the financial literacy of the military community, I've learned, I've seen more and more evidence that is true, that there is this community of supporters out there, this patriot affinity market, whatever you want to call it, that is really, really keenly interested in investing their dollars on places that support the military. The evidence I have is, one of the best anecdotal pieces of evidence I have is I was on my friend Carl Higbee, who I served with in the SEAL teams. He is a morning weekend host on Newsmax. So I told Carl, like, hey, there's this issue. Inflation is really eating into military salaries, pay decrease. We've started this platform to help military people with their financial future. Interested in talking about it? He said, yep, please come on. So Sunday morning, I was in California at the time, so like 4:30 a.m. hit, 4:30 a.m. At 4:30 a.m., late August, Sunday, TV hit on Newsmax, right? And I'm talking about Guild, and not only did we get, like 100 people signing up within 5 minutes of the segment, we had a series of people who had actually transferred their portfolios over from Robinhood to us, right? Now, I think partially Robinhood is its own story. They certainly were innovative in the space, but it's been pretty rocky for them. Now, if you look at revenue and stock and all that stuff. And I think there's still a little bit of a trust hangover in the market. But literally we got emails that morning from Sunday morning, late August, on Newsmax saying like, hey, please transfer my portfolio from X company to you guys. I want to invest on a platform that's more aligned with my values. And this was like the Waterboarded. Like you do all these pieces, and then every once in a while, something actually comes true. And we had been sort of like projecting this in our mind for a long time that, non-military people, just supporters of the military community, would want to invest on Guild simply for this fact. And then that email literally this morning, literally that same morning, several of those, like, please transfer. We want a company more aligned with our values. And that for us was a huge win.
Yeah. I mean, look, it makes sense. And I think also it goes back to courage is contagious. I think there's a whole group of people in the United States who they feel kind of weird about voicing support for various causes. But then when they see their neighbor or their friend or somebody they follow on social media or whatever say, hey, I care about this stuff and I'm willing to take action, even if it's just transferring my assets to a platform, if I'm going out in the community doing something, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, cool, I got air cover. Like, yeah, I care about that too, actually. And you start to see that build over time.
Yeah, and I think there's like this easy sand trap that we could get caught in on this, is that there's this political ideology or political lens, like, because everything's become so polarized, like we could think that like, oh, that's just right-wing stuff, right? Like the anecdote that I just told you is, from Newsmax, right? Which like leans right, as a news institution or whatever. But really what I think that this is as apolitical as it gets. And I think it's the same as we thought about in Iraq or Afghanistan when we were going to kick in a door. We didn't ask if the person in front or behind us, you Republican or you Democrat?
Who you voting for?
Yeah, who you voting for? Go, go, go. Clear. Yeah. Right? No, and I think one of the best parts of the military and why we still largely enjoy public support and institutional support as an organization is because we have been able, for the most part, to operate independent of that political lens. Like the independence of the U.S. military, that we serve whoever the commander-in-chief is at the time, is extraordinarily important. We've tried to bring that ethos to the Guild platform. Supporting the military is not a political act. It's not an ideological act, right? It doesn't mean that you're partisan in any way, shape, or form, right? We were talking about, Al Gore's innovation earlier today, coupled with, my appearance on Carl Higby's Newsmax segment there. Those are opposite sides of the political spectrum.
Well, I always joke that most people forget a Republican or a Democrat every 4 to 8 years becomes the leader of the military, right? Like right now, like there's a Democrat used to be Republican, and like it'll keep switching. And so if the leader has a different political ideology back and forth, like that's probably a pretty good thing.
Yeah, and this might be a bridge too far or whatever, but there are all of these like extraordinary lessons that I think you and I have tried to extrapolate from our military experience to bring to the civilian world. I think some of the popularity of Jocko and some of these Stan McChrystal, other like sort of storied military leaders who are now giving corporate speeches and stuff like that is that there is wisdom that is requisite in the military that adds value to our country and our culture. And I think this is one of those examples. The nonpartisan nature of the military, if we can extrapolate that out writ large to society, I think we'll all be better served. And that's certainly the ethos that we've tried to live at via Guild.
Yeah, I love the idea, and I think a lot of people who watch this will love it as well. Where can we send people if they want to download the app or participate?
Yeah. iPhone, App Store, look up Guild Financial, it'll come right up, download the app. And same with Android, all of the platforms, our website, guild.financial. And yeah, we love having, new people on board. It's great. We're building the community.
If you're watching this or listening and you like the
plug.
military, Kaj is being nice. Go download the app. Where can we send people to find you on the internet if they want to follow along?
I have my own website, kajlarsen.com. It's got a repository of my media work and stuff on there as well. I do the gram. I love the gram. At Kaj Larsen, just like
imagine if Instagram was out while you were a SEAL.
Oh my God! I feel like we barely like we couldn't even take photos in those days. So guys have all like the platoon guys these days, they got all these glamour shots, right? Us, we weren't even allowed to have cameras, So I don't even have that like great stash of like Kaj team guy photos.
Yeah, I think I have like maybe 12 or 15 photos from when I was in Iraq.
Actual photos, right?
But here was the thing is, I was there 0809, and so like when I got back, Facebook was just now like breaking out of like the college world. And I remember feeling like a freaking badass that I got to upload some photos on Facebook. And then now I'm like, I have no clue where photos are, any of this stuff. But like, there's those 10 photos on Facebook.
You got them.
Right?
Yeah.
So like you have physical photos, which I think is, for decades, that's what people had.
Totally. And I actually do still have like a shoebox. It's like a cliche, but a shoebox of like photos from, buds and, my first SEAL team and all that stuff. But but I love the gram. I'm big on the gram. I'm pretty responsive for the most part. Like if people, DM me, or you can always contact me through my website. My trigger warning is that most of my gram photos, are like Frogman Friday or like me spearfishing or like, there's it's almost all underwater.
Yeah. Well, that's now we have the technology where you can have a cameraman go with you, right, to take the photos.
Totally. God, I needed those guys in the teams.
Can you imagine at Buds to have cameraman? Like I do think a lot about like the vlogging culture. Like you see all these kids on YouTube and stuff. Like imagine when somebody starts going to the SEAL teams, be like, yeah, I'll come, but my cameraman is. The fuck out of here. It's gonna happen.
It's gonna happen. It's a new Navy.
I actually think it's probably one of the best things the Navy or Army could do, right? Is like go find one of these like influencer people who has somewhat of a big audience and say to them like, hey, you want to go through Buds? And again, the overlap of people who have an audience on the internet and want to go through Buds is like probably not that big, but you could probably find one person and say, hey, here's what we're gonna do is come out and do it. It's a recruiting video.
Yeah, I mean,
right? And maybe it's basic training and not Buds or whatever, but like you could figure something out. Where
they did this essentially, right? They had this documentary about Class 234 on Discovery Channel, and they followed cameras like all through. And I've gone back and watched it. Some of those dudes actually rolled into my class; they got hurt or whatever. And I've watched it, and it It's good. Like that's the best part to bring this whole thing full circle. Like there's no secret to buds, right? There's no all the secret stuff happens after buds, right? Like, and you graduate buds, you don't even know that much about being a SEAL. You do a lot of push-ups, right? But it's all right there in plain sight. You know you're going to go to buds. You're going to be in the water. You're going to lift some logs, right? You're going to run around with a boat on your head, like. No mystery, no steroids required, right? Just be tough and don't quit.
The last thing I'll say is we had a gold bar lieutenant show up in Iraq, and E7 platoon leader, I just clear as day, will never forget this moment. He said something, and the E7 said to me, goes, "Hey man, in here, you're the boss. Out there, I'm the boss."
Yeah.
And I remember being like, there's levels to this shit, right? and I think it is. It's like, look, there's the training is obviously very important, but then there's the real world application of this stuff, and the Navy SEALs are some of the best in the world at both.
Well, thanks, man, and thanks for being such an advocate of the military veterans community that we care so much about, and being one of these guys like our buddy Jack Carr, who has found his footing, in the civilian sector. Now it's our job to lift our military brethren up with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.